And much of the Torah is based around this idea of that. Now, the thing is, we learned last week that the first of the month we hear blasts, and in the second, and on the 10th day, it's that. And I want to hear Rob Zion's point on this. How do we understand this idea of 10? What is this idea of 10? And I know you teach this idea of the 10 and the 10 Sephiros in each of the days from the first day of Rosh Hashanah to the 10th day. What could these days, or how could we understand these days from a Cabalistic perspective? How could we understand it?
Absolutely. Very powerful point to say. Let me also say something as I draw into that particular expression. The first thing I want to say, Chief Rabbi, is the Torah tells us you shall afflict your soul, but it doesn't spell out and delineate in the Torah that afflicting your soul is a key word for fasting. So that in and of itself, Chief Rabbi, is a proof text for what we call the validation of the oral tradition. It is the oral tradition and the rabbis of that tradition that are coming on the scene to tell us that when the Torah says you shall afflict your soul, it's talking about fasting, abstaining from food and drink, right? And there's 5 afflictions that we perform on Yom Kippur. Food and drink is just 2 of them, right? The oral tradition is necessary in order to get that. So when I tell people that I follow the oral tradition, to the best of my understanding, to the best of my ability, based upon the information we have and the teachers that I have access to, people say, I don't know why you do that. All you need is the Torah. Well, if the Torah is sufficient as it is written, and that's all I need, then why are there so many areas that are beyond clarification, because they are written in a way that is ambiguous? So there's a saying in literature that any written text is subject to ambiguity. That means what the chief rabbi sees and understands will be different from what I see and understand in the same exact text, because rule of thumb, any written text is subject to ambiguity. We all have our own thoughts, our own opinions, and our own spheres of research and way of thinking and framing things. It's inevitable at some point 2 people are going to see things differently. So we don't think the Creator knows that. This is why he didn't simply tell Moses to give the people the Torah. He commanded Moses in Deuteronomy 5, verses 30 and verse 28. He said, teach it to them. Talmud them. Pay attention to even the wording. Talmud them. It's a plural form of Talmud right there. Right? The very word used in Deuteronomy 5 and 30 that describes how Moses is to teach it to us is the plural form of Talmud, and certainly that root lemud. So that's interesting. Another thing, Rabbi, before I go into the Kabbalistic way of understanding the 10th day, is to say this. The next holy day that follows Yom Kippur is Sukkot. The first thing we're told about Sukkot in the text is that we should get the fruit of a beautiful tree, right? The boughs of a beautiful tree. It calls it Hadar Ha'etz. What is that? We know today that that's the citron, what we call in Hebrew etrog. That's not in the text. Let me tell every Israelite something right now. Israelites say they don't follow the oral tradition. They also say they don't follow things like gematria. But let me tell you something. If you're using an etrog, which is that large lemon-like citrus fruit, during Sukkot, you are following the oral tradition. And what's more interesting about that is how that was even derived. The rabbis derived that the fruit of a beautiful tree is a reference to the etrog or citrus, the citron, through gematria. The phrase in Hebrew, Hadar Ha'etz, has the same gematria as citron, as etrog in Hebrew. That's how the rabbis derive that that's the fruit we're supposed to use. So every Israelite that's been doing this for 20, 30 years, you already been following the oral tradition. This is why we need to really come back to the sayings and ethics of our fathers, because we have already found a foundation to stand upon it already It's just that many in our community don't even know that. And I'll say this one last thing before going into a Kabbalistic interpretation. I ask Israelites that tell me they reject the oral tradition. I ask them, well, do you follow the Torah? And they say yes. And I say, okay, how many commandments does the Torah have? And they say, what are you talking about? Well, you follow the commandments, right? Yes. How many? They say 613. I say, are you sure? They say, of course I'm sure. And then I ask them, Chief Rabbi, where in the Torah does it tell us that there are 613 commandments? Nowhere. But I know of a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Simlai, who says in the Gemara in Tractate Makot 23b through 24a, he says 613 commandments were given on Mount Sinai. 248 positive corresponding to the 248 bones and ligaments in the human body, and 365 negative corresponding to the 365 days in a solar year. That expression that there are 613 commandments literally comes out of the oral tradition. So I tell people once again, while people profess that they reject it, a close examination shows you many people are already following. Even as Yom Kippur, as it's approaching, everybody's going to fast. The Torah doesn't tell you fast. The oral tradition says afflicting your soul means fasting. So you're already following the oral tradition. On that note, I want to say something about the 10th day of the 7th month. First and foremost, the numbers 1 through 10 take on a deeper meaning in the Bible apart from how it may be studied and observed in nature and or in science. What I mean by that, we go through the text of Genesis chapter 1 and we learn that there are 10 sayings of creation. What are we talking about? The 10 times where we encounter the phrase Vayomer Elohim, and God said, and God said, and God said. There's 10 of those. Then there's the 10 commandments. What's so special about that? Well, the first sentence of each of them is actually very special. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 has exactly 7 words and 28 letters. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashemayim ve'et haaretz. 7 words and 28 letters. Exodus chapter 20, which is the introduction to the giving of the law, verse 1 opens up. Vaydaber Elohim et kal hadebarim ha'ele lemor. And God spoke all these words, saying, 7 words and 28 letters. What's the relationship? Why does Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 have exactly 7 words and 28 letters? Why does Exodus chapter 20, verse 1 have exactly 7 words and 28 letters? Well, King Solomon synthesizes them because the world was built on Torah. The sages say God looked into the Torah and created the world. Hence we read, Zadik Yesod Olam, Proverbs chapter 10, verse 25. Zadik Yesod Olam, righteousness is the foundation of the universe. We read in Deuteronomy 6 and 25 that the Torah itself is righteousness. So Torah is the foundation of the universe, or as King Solomon says in Proverbs 8 and 30, Amon, it's the blueprint. God looked into the Torah and created the world. So the relationship in Genesis 1 and 1 and Exodus 20 and 1 is that God used the Torah to create the world. Thus, those 2 passages are connected. But we see that number 10. And while it will be controversial in the hearing of the Israelite community, it certainly won't stop me from saying it. There are many ways in which the power and attributes of the Creator manifests itself in the world, in creation, and in the Bible. Our sages highlight 10 of those expressions of the Creator's power and attribute, right? They're spoken of Cabalistically as Eser Sefirot. Like if you were to open up a text called, Sefer Yetzirah, the opening stanza speaks of Eser Sefirot Belima, right? 10 Sefirot of nothingness. when we examine what what a sephira is in the singular and what sefirot are in the plural, we are talking about divine expressions and extensions of the august power and attributes of the Almighty. And they have their parallels not just in nature, but in even the major patriarchs. So, for instance, the first three midot or attributes that we speak of are Keter, Chakma, and Binah, right? Keter is the crown, Chakma is wisdom, and Binah is understanding, right? Then we have Kesed, Gevura, and Tiferet. Kesed denotes the Creator's attribute of kindness. Gevura denotes the Creator's attribute of restraint. Restraint is also his attribute of deen, judgment. And then you have Tiferet that harmonizes the two, which balances them. Then you move on to what's called Netzach, victory, and then Hod, glory, and then harmonized by Yesod, foundation, all culminating with what's called Malkut, kingdom. All 10 of what we refer to Kabbalistically of the Sefirot are 10 main ways of expressing the divine attributes in nature, in time, and in the reality and shape of man in the narrative of the Torah. This is in the words of the sages, this is the 10 of all 10s. And what that means is anything that falls under the number of 10 that we see in the Bible is always a perfect parallel to what we're describing as the 10 Sefirot. They are alluded to, just for anyone's namesake, they're alluded to in the prayers of King David in the book of Chronicles, where he says, yours is the greatness, yours is the honor, to you belongs the kingdom. When you go through all of those words in Hebrew, that's the last of the 7 Sefirot, Kesed through Malkut, all mentioned by David. So we have textual references to what we refer to Kabbalistically as Sefirot, right in the text itself. And of course, the upper midot, Keter through Binah, you also can find in the text of the Torah. So when we talk about specifically the 10th day of the 7th month, we're talking about Malkut, the Sephirot of Malkut. The best way to describe Malkut within the context of the 10th day of the 7th month or Yom Kippur is to understand its function with relation to the Sefirot. So all of these divine expressions of the Creator's august power and his attributes all combine and are funneled or channeled through this Sephirah or this divine expression that we refer to as Malkut, which is feminine and also falls under another divine appellation or epithet, which we refer to as the Shekinah. For instance, many rabbis and sages teach that when we go into Galut, when we go into exile, the Shekinah goes into exile as well, the divine presence of the Creator, right? And so in tying in Malkut to judgment in general, we're talking about a feminine idea, right? Even as the term, and this is no coincidence, this is not haphazard, that the very word for judgment in Hebrew, mishpat, is a feminine noun in Hebrew, mishpat, right? The tav at the end as a suffix is a feminine noun, right? Shekinah, feminine, Malkut, feminine. When we talk about male and female and their counterpart in the spiritual hierarchy, the female denotes judgment and the male denotes kindness. And so the Creator is entering into with us judgment on the 10th day, which is the perfect composite or parallel to what we're calling Malkut. I would love to go a little bit more heavier, but I would love to see what the chief rabbi has to add. And
First of all, that was
just for the
beautiful.
reference, in First Chronicles, thank you, Nasi Ariel, 29 and 11, this is where King David alludes to the lower 7 midot or Sefirot, which is from Kesed to Malkut. This is in David's prayer. So sometimes when people hear things that are said to be Kabbalistic in origin, and they say, yeah, I hear that. That sounds great, but you got to show me in the Bible. You got to show me in the Torah. Where here is your reference. King David mentions the lower 7 midot from Kesed to Malkut, all in that passage. But teach, Chief Rabbi.
Yeah, first of all, that was beautiful. That was like there you about the Yitzir, yeah, the whole thing. So in support of that beautiful understanding, the thing is like this.